Hey guys, word to the wise. I just want to kind of touch base with you guys on this solar flares report I saw today. And normally I don't like to get into the whole rumor mill and things like that, but with the blackouts that have happened in large areas, I thought it was kind of interesting, now that they're pointing to this, because you've always heard that solar flares can knock out the power, yet nobody's ever reported this kind of a thing ever happening. And people will say, oh, there was the one time in 1851 in Europe when a solar flare hit the earth and it melted the power lines. How about it was people who didn't understand electricity at the time, and if you use the wrong size wire and you're trying to carry too large of a current, yeah, you'll melt your wires. I've done electrical work for many years. So to see people pointing at that, or like there was that one area in like Siberia where the trees got all knocked down, and people say, oh, well, that was because of an asteroid passing by the Earth or solar flares. There's a lot of different ideas. I think it was a weapon that we tried to test, tried to do something with, and it kind of backfired in a way, or maybe it just happened to work the way it did. And hey, you want to keep a secret? Say you don't know what happened, and we don't know where this came from, and it must have been something from space, yada, yada, yada. But if we live in a dome on a flat Earth, and what was interesting about these news reports, if you watch the larger NBC one that is titled Solar Flares Trigger Radio and Communication Blackouts Across the Earth. So what they were saying in that is that the solar flares were interrupting the magnetic, the magnetic barrier around the Earth, and it was disrupting the, communications, radio waves, and things like that. But like I have satellite radio, it's like $3 a month in my car, and if you get too close to a building, you lose signal. If you go under a bridge, sometimes you can lose signal. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes I think it has like a pre-recorded, like couple seconds ahead, so that way if you have an interruption, it kind of stays with it. But I've always thought that I've had a lot of arguments with a person that would always say, I worked with satellites, I've seen how the whole thing works, and I always would throw things back at him, and I would say, well, look at cell phone towers. If satellites help us with cell phone towers, how come cell phone towers don't have satellites on them? Little mini discs that look up so that way they can receive satellite signals. Instead, there are always these bars that are facing sideways, so they can face towards each other, all the towers. And I remember having, I did a side job for somebody, and he let me borrow one of his satellite dishes and a box, and all I had to do was just figure out how to line it up. And so I went and I looked at somebody else's house that had a satellite dish. I looked at the orientation of how it was facing, and I kind of kept that in mind as I went home, and I pointed my satellite dish and I hooked a TV up to it outside. I put it on a pole and I sat there and directed it, and I was able to line it up. So you can go on the box and it'll tell you how close you are. But I thought, I'm like, what are the chances that, because I've always thought satellites not being a real thing, and I'll get a little more into that, but bouncing from the ground, hitting the dome, and bouncing those things back down. I've heard about Operation Fishbowl. I've heard about, them trying to break through the dome, possibly in Antarctica. There's a lot of nuclear tests they were doing down there because they're closer to it because of it coming down. And what was the other things? Was the one rocket test they did in the desert in America, where they launched the rocket, and it was the fastest, highest rocket test privately done, and the rocket goes 70 miles up and spinning in all directions, has cameras viewing in all directions, and was going at a high speed and instantly stops dead in its tracks as it hits something. You can hear it thump, and then it falls back down to Earth. Did it hit something? Did it hit the dome? I think of the ISS and the whole thing of like, oh, the ISS is not held in zero gravity, but it is thrown at 18,000 miles an hour, and it's constantly falling around the Earth. And I always thought that was kind of an odd thing for satellites then that are being allowed to be put up there, endangering the people that are on there. And, well, why then don't you have like beacons that they can see or something like that, you know, in case one of these things falls out of orbit or they bump into each other, all of a sudden you get, you know, something coming at you. There's nothing they could do, but there's no evacuation system in place for the ISS if they supposedly get in trouble. So, you know, the people that were up there for a year, blah, blah, blah. And I could sit here and just go in so many different directions with this, you know, with the air and all that. How do they breathe? But other than that, I mean, it's interesting because now they're putting this blackout solar flare thing. They're monitoring a major solar storm that is, you know, directing itself slowly. It's coming around and it's going to be aiming at us. You know, is this storm going to do? And then just imagine, bloop, the lights all blink out in America and they say, well, that's because of the solar storm. Now we need to safeguard and redo our power grid systems in a better, stronger, different way. We all have to understand the dangers here and be on board. And what do they also need? They need to have a larger power grid for all this AI infrastructure. You know, I think Days of Noah has pointed that out many times, saying that, you know, they don't have enough power to run all these things, and especially if you're going to run like all these new superconductors that they've been working on. And back in the car thing for the last couple of years, you notice the chip shortage and superconductors. And now you have all these big companies and plants for all these computer tech and AI that are being built. Bum, 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 bum. It just goes and goes and goes. And you got to think how massive of a scale this stuff could really be. I'm not saying it is, and I'm not saying I know, and I'm not saying I have the proof. But looking at these things, you know, just seeing little bits and taking all these little nuggets and just constantly keeping them in mind, and now you start putting them together in just this idea. Just an idea. I'll leave it at that. Because like I said, I could go on for days talking on these kinds of subjects and how you can see a link to a link to a link to a link to a link. So, just a word of the wise, just putting it out there, you know, keep it in mind, put it in your pocket,